the journey in a moment in time. And sure, being a part of maybe Firehouse Subs 15 years ago was the sexy thing and was really interesting. And look at their exit. Look at what Don Fox, who is a friend, has done. Wonderful outcomes for many operators as well. But that's not always the case. And so I think I think you're pulling out something here that is a bit of a tightrope walk for franchise partners looking for that investment of dollars, especially if it's going to be in food where the margins are already tight, to be very, very critical of the operating team, the support team. And sometimes that's not having the biggest, ivory tower office. It's not having a marketing team of 50 people. Sometimes it's being a bit more scrappy. Sometimes it's being a bit more local. We feel that that's the case, and that's how we've chosen, I think, to market ourselves as a local Florida brand.
Welcome to the Franchise Hot Seat Podcast, where we talk about all things franchising. Now, here's your host, Dr. John P. Hayes.
Welcome back to another episode of my Franchise Conversations. We talk about all kinds of topics in franchising, sometimes the hot topics in franchising as well. And my guest today is Patrick Foor, and he is with Lime Fresh. But as always in my podcasts, I'm not as interested in a brand, or I'm not as interested in helping a brand sell franchises. Of course, brands have to do that, and lots of people come on my program because they want help doing that. Not that I'm a great help for that reason, but I want to discuss issues that surround the brand and issues that relate directly to my guest. And I have both of those topics today with Patrick as my guest, and we want to get right to it. So Patrick, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Dr. John. Happy to be here. Thanks for having us.
Sure. Good. All right. So you were a dishwasher before you knew about franchising, probably. Tell us about that. I've had more than one dishwasher on my podcasts.
Sure.
And people who've risen very nicely through the franchise ranks. So talk about that experience.
Well, I think I come by hospitality very naturally, and it started in the dish pit, working my way through. And as a teenager, really fell in love with the business, restaurants, hotels, the sense of hospitality in general. One thing led to another. I took a brief sabbatical, went to school, came back, and an opportunity presented itself to take what I'd done in, dishwashing years all the way up to kind of being a manager of an offsite catering. This is late 90s, gosh, a long time ago. And an opportunity fell in my lap to come help another brand build from single units to multiple, over 100. And it just kind of snowballed from there. It was a neat opportunity to kind of take that love for hospitality, to build something special, to work my way through. At the time was Tijuana Flats was the company's name at a Winter Park. And then ultimately, as life has a way, just reconnected with a longtime friend of mine here, who is the chairman of the entity who bought Lime Fresh. And he had said, help, I need some help. And I said, sure, happy to do so in navigating the both roles as CEO and CMO for Lime Fresh. There's times I miss the dish pit, Dr. John.
Yeah. So speaking of the dish pit, it's always interesting. Like I had a dishwasher who started out at Pizza Hut and today owns about 100 Pizza Huts. Wow. So that's a great story. You didn't start out washing dishes at Tijuana Flats, but that's the brand you eventually landed with. Was that your first franchise experience?
It was, and what I knew about franchising was about this much. Yes. I was given a job description of about 3 lines, and I looked up at the guy extending the offer, and I said, well, where's the rest of the job description? He goes, the rest is going to be up for you to build. And it was a really unique opportunity to kind of work into the space. We were franchising at that time, learning the ropes about what was the UFOC, right? Back in the day, yeah. Building out the intake platform and being able to be a relationship lead for each one of our 21 franchisees. That was where I sort of cut my teeth. That was sort of Act 1 over there. Act 2, we had closed franchising to any net new franchise partners. The second act, I took all sort of the lessons on how to do site selection, construction, and opening, and did that for our company stores before the third act, where I sat on our board before we had a private equity visit and an exit in 2015, I believe it was. So yeah, I definitely did from the dishwasher all the way to the boardroom, and I still do enjoy doing some dishes.
So can you believe how little people know in America about franchising?
I can. Yes. It strikes me as a wonderful business model for people that want and accept the support. There is, I think, a dearth of information around what it means to be a good franchisor, as well as sometimes what it means to be a good franchisee and partner. And we talk about our franchise as partners. They're the ones with the risk. They are certainly the ones guilty of operating for multiple years. And we take that lens on a lot of what we do, be that conversations with our franchise partners, and try to treat them like this. And I think that's something that should be, I think, hopefully another topic for another day, but that's how we feel about it. And I wish there were more information, for sure.
Well, there is a good start at getting more information, with several universities in the last 10 years bringing on franchise programs for their students. But we need 100 times more of that, because franchising is such a powerful force for people who don't always have a lot of money, and for people who don't have a business background necessarily, to own their own little business empire and create legacy wealth. But and I'm not selling franchising at all, because I'll tell people not to get into franchising just as quickly as I would say get into franchising. A lot of education that has to be done. It's a shame franchising hasn't done a better job of education. But there are a lot of issues at stake in running a business, and particularly including franchising. So let's talk about Lime Fresh Mexican Grill for a moment. Founded in Miami Beach in 2004, and I hope my research is correct it where it's not, built around fresh-made Mexican food with no freezers, no microwave philosophy, developed a loyal South Florida following. And maybe I'll stop right there, because as great as South Florida is, particularly in franchising, if Texas isn't leading franchise development, South Florida is. Not Florida, but South Florida. So in this part of the country and in Texas, franchising is well known and well respected, and people want to use the franchise methodology as their means of building a business. But there's a lot to be said today. People are leaving Miami in some cases, because that's a whole different world. Now, I was just there a weekend ago and loved my experience in Miami. Lots of friends there, lots of people in franchising there, but it can be a bit of a madhouse. And there's that Miami mentality that as you move up north towards West Palm Beach, for example, towards Jupiter, which is probably a better example, on up into Orlando and Jacksonville, mindsets are a little different. So is Miami founded a good thing for a franchisor, a food franchisor particularly, to boast about?
Well, you look at where 60% of Florida, probably more than that now, the population lives, and it's in those 3 or 4 counties you just mentioned, West Palm being among them. You're right to identify some of the operating challenges. Probably the most pressing is the overhead, right? Expressed as landlords and rents. We're an inline user. We don't do freestanding, no drive-through. So we're in a power shopping center, and where I think Florida has enjoyed a great boom for for growth in terms of people, especially post-COVID, some of the retail hasn't caught up. And so it compresses even further. And I think that that's true of South Florida. So it's an incredibly competitive market. It makes getting in difficult, but being from, right, I think is your notion. Being from is certainly part of our go-forward story. There's just an energy in Miami. And, not all of the restaurants have the benefit of being what we call Lime Fresh 2.0, but taking some of that energy, that ritmo, that the nightlife, what Miami's known for, and taking, I think, a Florida approach. And in our two stores we have here in Greater Orlando, they feature what's called Lime Fresh 2.0. So in 04, the brand was started with fresh and focused. That's the part that hasn't changed. The part that has changed is, I think, an homage to Miami. So it's Mexican-inspired food, Miami-inspired vibes. So that's how we kind of carry forward. But in Orlando, we've launched the full bar program where we've got actually bar seats, a bartender. And so what you walk into is an elevated version of what was started in 2004.
So people who want to get into the food business need to be aware that there's more to it than the food.
Yes.
And that sounds like an oversimplification, but people will still say to me, well, I'm going to buy a food franchise because everybody's got to eat. And yeah, that's true. We all love to eat. We've all got to eat, but there's a lot to eat. There are a lot of choices to go eat. Why are we going to go to Lime Fresh or any other brand in the food industry? Why are we going to your brand? And that is a stumbling block for a lot of these businesses. And as you just explained, you've got to be aware, are you a standalone eatery or are you an inline eatery? Why is that? Delve into that a little bit more. Why should that matter to a franchisee?
I think the thing that would be the first door to walk through would be the finances around doing a freestanding building where perhaps the land is under a ground lease, which adds a layer of finances. And then you have vertical construction costs, much less the acquisition. The process, I think, is very similar when you get to the point of construction by the time you're doing furnitures and fixtures and equipping, but getting a freestand off the ground can be much more capitally intensive. And that's, I think, something that the franchise community needs to understand. Now, there are brands that are franchise brands that are food focused, that's their model. That's how it works. And it typically is mated with a drive-thru. In Florida, drive-thrus have become pretty expensive to do from an impact perspective. And so I think you've just got to understand the way the consumer wants to have the food. And with Lime, we are trying to meet as many people where they want to be met, right? Be that technology, be that in-store or third party, which I'm sure has shaped quite a bit of the franchising language on how brands take what was a dine-in customer who's loyal still, but just you're never going to see them again. But I think the notion of finances, Dr. John, are probably the ones to me to be very peculiarly focused on when you're getting into a food franchise. It also is the case that, it depends upon the model. If you've got what we call a scoop and serve, think Subway or Chipotle, where some of the labor and some of the wait time is actually, done at the same time, right, when it's built in front of you and a high rate of customization versus something like Lime Fresh that's a little more fast casual, sit down, we bring the food to you, or even novel concepts we're seeing move through the system with breakfast, day parts, not having to operate that third evening or dinner time hour, would all be things that I would encourage food-focused franchise partners or thinkers to really dive into and understand.
So you were in a Lime Fresh was built in a unit in a small shopping center in West Palm Beach. I was very happy to go there once, because it disappeared before I could go back again. It was right next to a Bole, across the street from a standalone PDQ, other food businesses in the area. But this is West Palm Beach. For one thing, we need good restaurants in West Palm Beach. The Independence, there's some fantastic. And of course, if you go across the water, across the intercoastal onto the island, you got great food over there. But if you're not looking for a $100 meal and you're looking for something more reasonable for yourself and maybe your family, you're going to look at a Bolé or a Lime Fresh right next to each other. Was that the problem in West Palm Beach? Bolé was next door to you. Why'd that Lime Fresh disappear?
When I first landed at Lime Fresh, which was 2021, the franchise partners made aware to me that there were going to be several locations they were not going to continue to operate. Part of growth is cutting deadwood, and I think that they had stretched their ability to, I will tell you, probably service that location with the expected level of oversight in pulling from an hour away from another market right back and forth. I don't think it was so much a problem of who was next door. Love Bolé, love the concept. I have one across the street from my Orlando Lake Nona location. They seemingly do fairly well. I don't think it was the next door neighbor. There were two challenges that in that piece were true. Parking was always very tight and difficult. If you can't park it, you can't feed it. Is one of the truisms that I was told long ago, cutting my teeth on real estate. Secondarily, I think part of what had transpired there was really just operator maybe fatigue, as I had said, and the discipline to get back and forth with that store. That's the why. And you talk to my franchise partners, Nick, David, Grant, whomever they may end up being, they'll probably tell you the same thing. And so it is always tough to spend that much money to support and market that restaurant or those restaurants, and then only to have it in several years, unfortunately, shutter. And as difficult as those decisions are, that's also why I think getting so much of the due diligence for franchise site selection, whether that be inline like myself or whether that be some other non-traditional, really that's where this really depends upon experts to come in and say, okay, how do I want to think about this? The common problem we run into, and I have over time and time again, is I meet a franchise partner and saying, well, I'm going to put one right by my house. That is not a real estate strategy, John. That's a convenience component, and sometimes you have to guide, you have to advise, you have to direct, and that's what a franchisor is supposed to do.
Yeah. So here's where I'm a bit confused about Lime Fresh.
Okay.
It's had multiple ownership through the years, several different owners, one being Ruby Tuesday, which
That's right.
Great operator.
Yeah.
How could Ruby Tuesday not make it work? And what concerns me about this kind of an issue is if Ruby Tuesday didn't make it work and others didn't make it work, including the original organization, why is it going to work today?
Ooh, John, this is the fun part. For me, I can't answer for the Ruby Tuesdays years. I know the original owner sold to Ruby Tuesday, and I think in an attempt by Ruby to do something that they may had acknowledged they weren't good at, which may be concept creation. So at the time, buying a brand that was going to probably diversify their restaurant portfolio probably made some sense. But Lime is a Miami energy vibe. It's a very different type of kitchen than a Ruby Tuesdays would be, and so perhaps I'll only proffer that perhaps it was just a mismatch in expectations on what it was to be in the fast casual space. We bought the brand from Ruby Tuesday, and over the past 8-9 years now, Everfresh, the current owner, the team that bought from Ruby, has tried, I think, to answer what that future of Lime Fresh becomes, and what does it go into. I think about what we've done to give birth to Lime Fresh 2.0, whether that be the next chapter for our brand and the novel menu engineering that we've done, some new technology as well as full bar, and you've got to provide the why, right? And so I think at the top, one of the questions was why Lime Fresh, right? Why Lime Fresh now, I think, is probably two main points. Miami Mex, Sunshine Mex is as good and alive and well as it ever has been. Thankfully, through the operators on my team and the consistency of execution, Lime Fresh has won more awards over the past 18 months than they ever have, regardless of whether it was the original owner or now. Best fast casual out of Aventura. We have Best Mexican, and from the Guide to Florida, Best Margaritas and Best Mexican from Miami's own Herald's award piece, and QSR articles all the way through to kind of advance that the world doesn't need another taco shop, right? What we do need are the taco shops to do a better job taking care of the guest, taking care of that completed order, and being able to get back to that hospitality. I think that I know that that's on display with each one of my Lime Freshes. And I think that there's a certain element of nostalgia as well. And I think it's time for us to kind of say, okay, had the investment continued to move forward some 22 years later, this is what a fast casual taco shop should look like. It just happens to be Miami inspired.
So what do you think, look 10 years down the road, how many Lime Fresh units will be not just in Florida, but let's say in other states? How many other states, and what do you see happening in 10 years?
I can't go as far as 10, but I'll give you the 5-year version. Lime Fresh at 5 years is probably numerically between 50 and 100 operating and open restaurants. We are consolidated down into 6 or 7 different states. That's 10 west and 95 north or 75 north, depending on where you're going. Kind of stretching the geography and earn as we grow. Our focus is on Florida, and I believe that other brands, they mean well when they kind of leapfrog states or get a really great RDA that they put together, a regional developer agreement that's really hard to turn down. Wow, growth, that's great. We're going to focus Florida first and really make sure that we're able to, out of Orlando, support, advise, and guide our franchisees. And then naturally, I think things will move into the Georgia, the South Carolinas, the North Carolinas, in a way that still reads Miami Mex, right? But drags along some of these award-winning tacos, burritos, and margaritas in a way that I think is still going to resonate. That's the plan. And in 5 years' time, if you have me back on, if we're only half along that journey in terms of numeric count, but we've done it right in Florida, I'm going to be okay.
So you're talking about 50 to 100 units in 5 years. And one of the things we always hear from franchisors and from the franchise collective mindset as it is, if you don't have 100 units, you're not making any money as a franchisor. And that's a danger for franchisees.
Yes.
So how do you respond to that, Patrick?
I think the franchisor's role in the relationship is to be that advice, that guide, that direction for every one of our franchise locations and partners. Where I think a franchisor gets a little bit out of whack would end up being overly abusive rate fees, schedules, royalty rates, marketing, right? I think that if you're not 100 units, that math, at least for how it works for Lime Fresh, isn't the case. And the other way that I'd kind of think about answering this question would be, I think that once you get to a certain size of franchise locations, it's incumbent for the franchisor to continue to invest in the people and the ways in going to the individual markets that really makes sense to resonate, because every market's a little bit different, right? Miami's certainly different than Jacksonville. But having that localized knowledge, I think that there's a big challenge for those brands that have 300-500 units and are choosing to grow by franchising. I'd ask the other question: how good a job are they at those big numbers at really being novel, influential, creative, directional for their individual franchise partners? Maybe too big is just part of the problem, but we don't think like that.
Helping a franchise prospect decide where to invest their money is one of the most important things a franchisor needs to do. And many don't do that very well, but it's not necessarily the franchisor's fault, at least not 100%. Some franchise investors make bad decisions. Many do, in fact, for a number of reasons. But if you look at an opportunity and you say, well, I'm going to become a franchisee in an inline unit in food, and I'm going to invest so much money, I only have so much to invest, am I better off going with a brand that they've only got 15 or 20 units, whereas I could go with one that's got 800, more than 1,000 units? It seems to me there's maybe more security for me. Maybe there's more opportunity for me. Maybe there's smarter people there. Certainly the public knows 800 to more than 1,000 brands better than, well, they're just 15 or 20 brands. How do you help someone decide, and how important is that to make sure they're going to be the right operator for Lime 2.0?
Good question. And I think about this at some point in time, those brands that are 100 to 200, they were at once 15 to 20. And probably what they did at 15 to 20, investing in the relationships, pulling the partners closer, letting the partners be participatory in some of the decision making, whether that be marketing cooperatives, whether that be branding operations as well. I think that that's probably how they got there, is doing it the right way, right? There is no lack of new concepts for sure and for certain coming to the market, and everybody wants to be that first person. And so I look at this as sort of the journey in a moment in time, and sure, being a part of maybe Firehouse Subs 15 years ago was the sexy thing and was really interesting. And look at their exit. Look at what Don Fox, who is a friend, has done. Wonderful outcomes for many operators as well. But that's not always the case. And so I think I think you're pulling out something here that is a bit of a tightrope walk for franchise partners looking for that investment of dollars, especially if it's going to be in food where the margins are already tight, to be very, very critical of the operating team, the support team, and sometimes that's not having the biggest, ivory tower office. It's not having a marketing team of 50 people. Sometimes it's being a bit more scrappy. Sometimes it's being a bit more local. We feel that that's the case, and that's how we've chosen, I think, to market ourselves as a local Florida brand. And for right now, it's successful. It's the strategy is working.
So is it foolish to some extent for a new franchise operator, let's say somebody who's going to leave a profession where they've been for 15 or 20 years, they don't want that profession anymore, they want their own business, they've saved, their 401k is available to them to convert into their own business, and they want to take advantage of that. There are so many service businesses today where the margins are so impressive.
Sure.
And when you look at food, wow, you don't know what's going to happen, particularly nowadays in this country. Will they want to get in their car and drive over, or is gasoline too expensive? Maybe that's just a blip that we're having because of a little nasty war. But we've been experiencing inflation for year after year after year. Just go buy ground beef today and look at what you paid 5 years ago.
Sure.
So there's some sense, some people say, I think I'll stay away from food. I'd rather be a customer than be an owner. But for my own business, I'm going to get into one of these service businesses or quasi-service businesses where the margins are really strong and I don't have to worry about inflation as much.
There's no denying over the past few years attending to the MUFC in Las Vegas that services and goods and those services attached to that, that's where where franchising models have gone. And I think that that's probably indicative of the comment or indicative of the issue and the comment you made around margin. In a service business, it's also going to come down to where is the prospective franchise partner in their working life. If you're a retiree and you can retire when you're 20, that's not a problem. It's not an ageism thing. Or if you're retiring when you're 65, those are very different sets of risk. There are two different sets of buckets of money to pull from as well. And I think that that's part of our job in educating and saying no early, and saying this is going to be something that's a bit more labor intensive. The timing isn't right, and being able to feel really good about sometimes having to say no when you don't want to take somebody's lifelong earnings and say, look, you're going to put this capital at risk. You could say the same of the services business as well, and there's just different models. And with food, when you look at what food and fast casual has evolved into, and maybe it's because of post-COVID, or maybe just because of the changing nature of the demographic in the United States, it's become transactional. It feels a little bit cold. It's not as alive and as well as it should be, right? And so where we are spending time and interviewing individuals that are coming to the brand for subsequent growth, it's what's that sense of hospitality, right? That's that part of the resume that doesn't always come through for us. and spending time with those potential operators to make sure that, okay, they can meet the financial requirement and they've certainly got the operational chops. But if I got a telephone call from them on a Sunday morning, am I going to go, oh no, here we go again? Or, hey, let me get this real quick. That's a mindset. And I think that that's probably, that's true of restaurants. It's true of service franchise models, probably true of a lot of businesses.
Many franchisors that should tell a prospect no won't tell a prospect no, simply because they need the money. They need to sell a franchise to keep the lights on.
Right.
And this is likely to be more of the case for a franchisor under 100 units or under 50 units than for somebody who's already got 300 units. And they're going to be able to meet their payroll without selling a franchise this month. How should prospects think about that? Should they be aware of that? Is that true, what I'm saying, or not the case?
I believe that your opening statement is correct. Yes, franchisors, regardless of what line of business you may be in, have to do a better job of saying no. I think that there's real court cases that are playing themselves out in the Wall Street Journal that from last week when that doesn't happen, when full disclosure of some of the overhead infrastructure isn't happening. I think that those are as silly as it sounds when we get a telephone call and saying, hey, I'd love to learn a little bit more about Lime Fresh, or the knee-jerk reaction isn't, great, let me tell you everything in 30 minutes what you're going to learn. It's saying, why'd you call? Why Lime Fresh? What's behind this? Oh, my mom and dad owned a mom and pop up in Atlanta, and gosh, this has just been something, and I've been looking for a brand, and my wife and I live down in West Palm, and it's now time. Okay. Well, now let's take the next 28 minutes and have that conversation. And it's an act of discipline, because if all the franchisors are just in it for that money component, right? I got to keep the lights on. I got to sell the deal. You're going to watch that brand never make it to 100 restaurants, or you're going to watch that 300 brand, that behemoth, the one that's been lauded in magazines, unfortunately shutter a lot of restaurants. I think about what's happening in the West Coast, California, a couple larger brands that are out there undergoing some pretty significant legal challenges, perhaps because that was the mentality they took. I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah. So let's talk about skills that are required to be a franchise operator, but also to be a franchisor. If you've seen brands at 6 units and you've seen brands at 130 and more units in food, and if you're a franchisee, do you need different skills when there are only under 10 units open than you need when there are more than 100 units open?
I think skills, I'll trade you the word for behavior. With a franchisee, with maybe a franchisor model with its 10 to 25 or 30, the franchisee needs to be willing to speak up. They need to be able to say, I understand, but let me question a couple of the decisions here. Being a participant in some of the business planning, I think, is behavior, and that it may present as being exceptionally well organized or exceptionally adept at marketing, or maybe another business element to it in terms of skills, but it's the behavior, I think, that's probably more important to a franchisor. It also sets a relationship, a set of expectations up between the two parties, and that's what also we are looking for, as long as a couple other brands we're running alongside with, and saying, let's make sure we get these inclusive conversations going early as we possibly can. The other way I think about this is, what is the cadence that a franchisor stands up in front of franchisees and gives a report, gives an update of something. We have a standing monthly with my franchise partners, where it's all hands. We go through all 5 or 6 different elements. We certainly go through financial results. We go through operational excellence. We go through people development, which is tremendous, because turns out just because you can sign a deal and open a franchise, hiring the right type of person is also very difficult. And that's what we're here to do as a franchisor, to provide some tools, advice, and guidance, and saying, here's what that segment looks like, or here's what the behavior looks like. So in another way to say that I think that it's behavior that really shapes early days for a franchisee.
And what's the difference behaviorally for a franchisor that has under 10 units but then has more than 100 units? How are those behaviors or skills different?
In my experience, and it's just based upon my experience, the operators that have over the 100 units don't spend any time in their operating stores or their franchise stores. They're somehow sequestered, maybe on purpose. That's home office or a restaurant support center. You call them when something's broken. You don't ever call them when something's going well. Those that are under that threshold, I think advice to franchisors are get a truck that's ready to do some miles and go knock on the front door and show up, call unexpectedly and saying, I'm in your market, professional courtesy, I'm going to go to your store. What is it that you need my help with? Those are very difficult to do at any stage of development, but it's exceptionally important that the franchisor take that, whether it be regular scheduled meetings and cadence and communication, being able to be available even in off hours to make some decisions, and then being able to go to where the profit's made. Think about that. You have to actually go as a franchisor to where the money you're collecting is being made from, and not only just because you want to ensure the quality, but because of the fact of your contractual obligations, because you're in a partnership. That's being a good partner.
Do you believe in a franchise profile or a personality profile if you're a franchisor, as you are, and if you're a prospective franchisee? Does a personality profile figure into your estimation, your evaluation of a prospect and deciding whether or not you want this person as a partner in Lime Fresh?
Yeah. Ethan Albert Carey is my VP of growth on our team here. I believe you know him, Ethan. He and I spent some time talking about this because, you'd like to be able to say, okay, for meta targeting, we want this segment and this demo in this area, right? And you find very quickly, at least in my experience, that is, it's a nice thought, but it's not really how this works. It's relationship based. I think that one of the behaviors that I appreciate most, or one of the personality traits, to answer your question, is being curious about this business. Beyond just, hey, I want to learn how much money I can make. It's what is it seasonally we're doing? What is the next upcoming trend? How does this fold into an LTO strategy? How can we have more local engagement with our individual units? That's a personality trait that I know that I enjoy because they prompt good questions. And sometimes we go, you know what, I don't have any idea, but we can go run that to ground. That's the one that I look for probably early in the discovery process is how curious of a person are they? And then ultimately, it would be nice to think that if this was, okay, they like Major League Sports and they drive this and they lit right here, that's just not the entrepreneurial journey, right? That's not how this works.
Do you require a personality profile of any kind, like a DISC, for example?
Franchise partners of mine have suggested saying, look, this could really be quite powerful. My wife does this quite a bit. She's not in the franchise world. She's in medical sales. They do that explicitly. They use the DISC technique to basically groom, and it's a two-way kind of environment, right? So Lime Fresh has a DISC personality and how we go to work on projects.
Exactly.
That is something that we're exploring into the fourth quarter. We've got a couple shares with a couple groups going right now, in fact, just to make sure that we've thought to ask all the right questions. And, it's as good as I think you and I would like to think we are and judges of character. Sometimes we get it wrong. And in not getting it wrong and saying no, but really missing on a potential yes. You know what? This came from left field, but I really like how that works.
Mm-hmm. There are numerous of these profiles out there, and some are franchise specific, and I endorse the idea of the personality profile. I happen to use DISC with my students, and I've used it for more than 40 years in franchising as well. And you're talking about behaviors, and the DISC exposes those behaviors right up front, which always confuses me as to why don't more franchisors know that, and why aren't they requiring that? So you said earlier, for example, that you want some questioning. a franchisee, an operator, particularly a new operator, in a brand that has under 50 units or under 20 units, maybe they need to ask more questions. And if you look at the disc profile, you might find out that they're never going to ask questions. They're too timid. They're too high of an S personality to ask questions. And you would know right away they're not going to ask questions, even when they should. Now, we also teach in franchising, you don't have to ask questions. A good franchisor has already figured it out. They know what the system ought to be, and they're going to teach you that system, and they don't want you lifting the hood, looking underneath, and asking, why does that wire go to that and instead of going over there? They don't want you asking. They want you implementing the system and making money. But there's, in those early stages of a franchisor's history, there are going to be a lot of questions that somebody needs to be asking. But you may have the wrong franchisee if you don't know. And behaviors, to me, they translate into skills. So you want to be good at asking questions. You've got to have the ability to do that. You have to have a personality profile that shows that you can do that. Sure. Or you could get the D personality who's not going to ask you any questions, but also not going to follow the system very well because they're going to do their own thing.
Yes, and I've got both in my system right now.
And imagine had you used a disc profile, you would have known to head off some of those problems.
That is true. Adopting legacy franchisees who've been drugged through quite a bit of the drama with the brand is also its own little psychoanalysis moment for me, myself, and being able to say, how do you heal the wounds, but also talk about the future? You're right, and it does have it takes the shape of the conversation and the personality and ultimately how that gets deployed on how they run their business. But it is a noted and needed element of intake for sure.
So Lime Fresh has had this growth journey, whether it's been a positive growth journey or as positive as you and franchisees may have wanted through the years. You're still on a growth journey. Mm-hmm. What do you need to do differently on the growth journey for Lime Fresh 2.0?
You know, the story back 20 years ago, brokerage networks, get a couple moving things forward. That's changed dynamically quite a bit with the advent of technology. One of the things that we did learn early on was that having a landing page dedicated specifically to franchise sales for the brand was tremendously impactful. That's a change we've implemented about 7 months ago, and it has helped the process quite a bit in terms of the growth and the eyeballs coming to it's the central repository for our storytelling too, right? When it comes to opportunities like this, other podcasts that are done, or other media that gets deployed. I also know that these decisions are made in cycles. Franchising, when to buy a franchise, there's certain hot topics, hot timing in certain periods of time when that doesn't happen. To be omnipresent, I wish I could be at every single one of these trade show conferences. That's the thing I wish I could do different, but you've got to be more selective in that. We also need to think regionally very carefully about where we drag the brand out to, so that we're not getting that Oregon operator saying, hey, I'd love this, and saying, gosh, we're just not ready for that yet. I think that's the thing we're going to be trying to change in the next 12-month cycles, is to be a little bit more calculated on those conferences and leveraging networks just like we have with you, Dr. John, and being able to be smart about some of those introductions, relationships, and being able to get some more eyes our way is certainly what I'd love to be able to do more of.
So it's a great advantage to a franchisor to say, we're going to concentrate on Florida, South Florida particularly, one of the greatest markets in business and in franchising, and a great business state. So things are a little easier here. It also says, well, we don't need to advertise for California or for New York. Also pretty good states for, well, maybe not California so much anymore, but still, you if you want to be coast to coast, you got to include all the states. That's a lot more marketing dollars. How does that help a franchisor to say, well, we're really only interested in Florida right now?
I think it's about credibility. Being able to be focused and measured at the expense of just tremendous growth, whether that be geographic growth or state growths, I think it's an active structure and discipline. That is how I know I talk about it, and saying when somebody goes, well, gee, I'd love to, can you come up to Chicago? We think we've got this perfect opportunity to do a takeover from existing inline stores and convert them to Lime Fresh. And my line is very similar. I said, I still have some great work to do in the state of Florida, right? I need that moment for myself. I was taught by my mentor that structure and discipline maximize the results of commitment and hard work. I can read that backwards and forwards 3 times over, but that's part of what our core culture here is to make sure that discipline is deployed. And that's a responsible franchisor. It's not spreading the wings too quickly, and also thinking about, if I go to Chicago, I have to get on an airplane and go live in Chicago. I need to be omnipresent, right? Or California, to your point. And that's not in the cards, not right now.
Yeah. So would Lime Fresh be better off corporately owned right now, or maybe forever?
That's a good question. The franchise partners that came on board 17 years ago. So we certainly adopted a franchise model. I think franchising is a way to remove some risk from the conversations. Would it be better corporately owned? I know that I'd be missing some of the tribal knowledge that my franchisees who live in the markets know. They know the schools, they know the librarians' names, they know these, they can be omnipresent. Yeah. So I'll answer the question, no, I don't think it's better off to be corporately owned. And our future is franchising for the reasons that we've talked about in our share today.
And related to that, what's the difference between a concept that becomes a nationally known franchise and a concept that just remains a great local brand?
I think in many ways it comes down to, what is it you're going to be? What is it you want to be when you grow up? Do you want to helm the world's largest taco shop, or are you really focused and can be and should be focused on being brilliant at some of those basics? I think it just comes down to appetites for whether it be grandeur or whether it be realistically being able to be a 22-year-old brand, having survived quite a bit of change and still relevant out there. I know which brand I'd like to lead, and it'll end up being the smaller, more dynamic, a little bit more frenzied version of a franchise, for sure.
Patrick, I appreciated the time. We're out of time, but I appreciated this conversation. I wish you and the Lime Fresh folks all the best.
I appreciate the opportunity. Always willing to share, and I know that we'll be seeing each other soon. Dr. John, thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Franchise Hot Seat Podcast with Dr. John P. Hayes. Tune in next time for more conversation around all things franchising.